gaze and gender stereotypes in American media. So, for a little introduction, the male gaze has negatively impacted women since the early days of media. So, women are usually seen as objects and merely just for male pleasure. And we see that a lot in the media in American culture. So, we can see that in Disney Channel, the way that Disney princesses are portrayed. And then also, as well as like Fox News, the way that the news broadcasters present themselves. So we chose to study one of America's favorite sitcoms, Friends, and we were analyzing the behaviors in that and then how it contributed to the male gaze and gender stereotyping. And gender stereotyping in the media can enforce gender roles and put males and females into a box and not allow them to express themselves, and specifically women, and puts them into a box in of ways they should and shouldn't be.
Okay, so our question that we proposed for research was, why is the male gaze and gendered speech stereotyping harmful to society? And the reason we chose to study this was because this is something that very negatively impacts women everywhere around the world. The male gaze, more specifically, places a woman's worth on their appearance over everything else that they are capable of, which can be very harmful, as we'll explain later. Gender stereotyping also doesn't allow women to fully represent themselves, and we'll talk more about gendered speech and the unfairness of that.
So, a literature review, we chose a scholarly article to study. So, this study measured young women's attitudes towards the male gaze following exposure to centerfolds of varying explicitness. So, they showed them different levels of explicitness, and then they immediately after the exposure, they did a 48-hour follow-up to see how they felt about it. So, the results supported the view that the more media depicts women and displays their bodies, the stronger the message they send that women are sights to be observed by others. And they also suggested that even brief exposure to explicit centerfolds can have a non-transitory effect on women's socio-sexual attitudes. So essentially, it's saying that women exposed to sexualizing images were less likely to support feminism, which was really interesting to me. And it said they're more likely to believe in rape myths. So, exposing some women to mainstream magazines and advertisements, which sexualize women, and others to advertisements that did not feature sexualized themes, women that were exposed to those sexualized images were more likely to agree with anti women myths about sexual violence, which is really contradicting and surprising. So, the hypothesis that exposure to centerfold images affects women's sociocultural attitudes, and that the more they're expressed to those images, and the more they accept male gaze than to women who were exposed to less explicit centerfolds.
So, the research method that we used was upon watching 10 episodes of the popular American sitcom Friends, we analyzed different behaviors that both men and women exhibited and looked for this specific criteria, and counted the number of times that happened. So the research criteria that was used was tag questions, qualifiers, interrupting, and joking. And so numbers of these were counted and analyzed, and then compared men and women with their relative findings. So in terms of qualifiers, it was found that in this sitcom that was analyzed, women use nearly triple as many qualifiers as men do when talking. And so, as mentioned, a qualifier is something like saying "I think." It's just makes it so your speech is less harsh. So on the show, as opposed to men who say directly what they mean, a woman will use a qualifier. In society, if a woman says the same thing that a man might say, then she might be considered harsh. It might be considered offensive. But if a man says it, it's considered direct, and it's just simply accepted. Oftentimes, yeah. So in the show, men also tend to make about 37% more jokes. It was found than women do, and even within these jokes that are made. they are more often accepted and laughed at than a joke that a woman would typically make, which is interesting. Um, Going on to the next slide, interruptions. This was a big one. It's not totally shocking that men interrupt women more than happens vice versa. Um, but it was really interesting, as was seen in the show, that women in general on the show got interrupted approximately 4 times as much as men did, with Rachel generally getting interrupted the most. Um, yeah, so with these interruptions, as the number of men that a woman is around increases, it becomes more likely that she will be interrupted when she's speaking. There's a scene where Rachel's talking about a significant life event with some of the men in the show, and she keeps constantly getting interrupted with them talking loudly about the football game that they had just watched. About half the times that she's talking, one of them will interrupt her and start speaking loudly over her. But she only interrupts one of them in return one time over the course of the whole conversation, which is interesting.
So, some of our analyze and findings that we were able to discuss was different gendered stereotypes in the male gaze. So, in this picture, we can see what's my boy doing with a Barbie, which we're going to dive into that a little bit later. And just this idea of the male gaze. Rachel, I can see you naked anytime I want. All I have to do is close my eyes, just over sexualizing Rachel's in that. So, we're going to watch this short YouTube video about a gender stereotype really quick.
Here's my boy, and here's his Barbie.
So we can see that Ross is very upset that his son is playing with a Barbie, and then we're going to go a little bit later into the episode.
It's the toughest guy in Toyland, Ben. Real American hero. I'm G.I. Joe. Drop the bar. Drop the bar.
So we can see in this sitcom that he is just really trying to get his son to give up the Barbie. He doesn't want his son to play with it, and he's visibly upset when his son walks in with the Barbie, even though that his son picked out that toy and he was content and happy and wanting to play with it. So we kind of ask this question, why is this happening? And if he's happy with the Barbie doll, why should he trade it for the soldier? And it really just comes down to gender stereotyping that we place on people. I mean, he's even starting as young as babies, we put them into these expectations that they should or shouldn't play with these certain toys. So in this next gender stereotyping, we have a little just scene, and I'll just read it off for you. Chandler says, "You're turning into a woman," to Joey. And Joey says, "No, I'm not. Why would you say that? That's just mean." Chandler, "Now I've upset you. What did I say?" Joey, "It's not what you said, it's how you said it." "Oh my gosh, I'm a woman." Kind of just portraying women as sensitive and dramatic. It's really demeaning, and it just portrays women as less than men and beneath, and that it's such a horrible thing to be portrayed as women. And also, it just keeps men from being able to really express their emotions and their feelings. So, the next part that we're going to talk about is the male gaze. So, in this show, Friends, many episodes you're actually able to see Rachel's nipples through her shirt. And after doing some research, we watched 10 episodes. In 7 out of 10 episodes, you were able to see her nipples. And doing some more research, I found that Rachel's nipples are visible in 70 to 80% of the episodes. And I was kind of wondering, why would this happen? Why would the producers allow this to happen? And the answer is just male gaze. It's just that they really enjoyed the more views that they would get because of this. And so they kept doing it. And we also see male gaze also relates to how men hold more lead positions in TV or movies. So the percentage of female protagonists has dropped from 40% to 29% in 1 year. So that's just really crazy how portrayed men are as more important than women in American media. So basically, how this affects women and men's worth is just stereotyping often contributes to negative gender roles. Men and women often feel that they have to act a certain way because society has defined certain expectations for us based on our gender. And unfortunately, this can hinder the authenticity of our relationships and cause communications. So, just in conclusion, we were talking about how negative it has been, just gender roles and the male gaze has been on society, just portraying women as objects and putting them in a sexual light. it's just really negatively affect women's self-worth.
Yes, it really does. And as was seen through this research study that we did, it was really interesting to kind of we kind of had an idea of what it might be like. That yes, men interrupt women more, but we just I don't know. It's interesting to see how extreme it actually is based on these findings, and to have it validated and backed up by research. And yeah, these